All right, let's get the assembly started on this thing. First and foremost, thank you very much for your business. I've worked really hard for a really long time to create the world's smallest high-performance jet pump for you guys to push these little sub 10-inch crafts way too fast. So it's been a lot of work, and it makes my heart really happy to see that you're interested in it. Let's rock and roll and get this thing put together. The way that this is going to be structured is that the first bit we're going to be putting together what I call the in the boat bits. These are the pump components that live inside of the hull, and then the outside of the boat bits it's really easy. That takes just a couple minutes. So it'll be in the boat bits in this video, and then construction of the scooter hull in the second video, and then the final touches, putting everything together. So it's all going to be one video, but if you see me with like different shirts or different lighting, that's why. So today we are going to need our, this is our motor water cooling housing and mount. We're going to need our intake. We're going to need our coupler housing. We're going to need our servo motor coupler. And then we're going to need our servo motor and our 2845 motor, as well as the drive shaft, and the steering shaft will probably be in another video. And then the other affiliated hardware. In this video, I'm working under the assumption that you purchased a parts kit or that you have all of the parts on the build list put together. I've put together parts kits for you guys, and that includes like pre-cut drive shafts that are already flattened. I'm working on a machine right now to flatten these things very accurately, the little keyways for the drive shafts. So although it's not a requirement, I'm selling them pretty cheap, and it is going to make life way easier for you guys. So if you see something like this half cut down coupler or something that doesn't look familiar, it's in the parts kit. If you haven't seen it, read the documentation. There'll be detailed instructions on how to create these components if you so choose. Let's rock and roll, and we're going to need one more part. It's going to be the intake grate right here that just finished printing, so that will also be part of our assembly shop. This video does not include post-processing. I'm not going to do it here. I highly recommend that you post-process all your parts to maximize the performance of this jet pump, but that is your own decision there. So we're going to get started with the intake. So the intake, as you can see here, this is fresh off the print bed. Even if you're not going to post-process the inside, which I highly recommend doing, the way that this thing prints, which is like this, there's some overhangs here, and you might be able to see it's just kind of boogery in that region there. So you're going to want to absolutely sand or post-process this little part. Even if you don't do any post-processing, please just make sure to go through and sand this little ridge. It's like it's the lower transition lip, and it's really important that that area is smooth, because if not, it's going to introduce turbulence like immediately, and that is just going to suck your performance away. So just take a minute to do that. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to install captured nuts. I used captured nuts in this design because they're actually stronger than brass inserts. There's several studies on it. They're a little bit more of a pain in the butt to install. Well, I don't know. They're actually not too bad to install. So before we get going on that, let's go over the required tools for this build. We are going to need a M2 Allen key, which I believe is a 1.5 millimeter Allen key, and then we are going to need an M3 Allen key, which I believe is like 2 millimeters. In addition, this is not required but makes life a lot easier. Have yourself a sharp pair of needle nose pliers laying around. They make inserting these nuts much easier. As far as the consumables go, we're going to need white lithium grease to grease our bearing with. We are going to need some silicone. This is the kitchen and bath 30-minute dry silicone. It's clear, works really great. And then we're also going to need some blue Loctite. This is blue, right? I made that mistake one time and one time only in my life. And yeah, don't make that mistake, it sucks. All right, so let's get down to business. First thing we're going to do is install the 8 captured nuts that live inside of this component. It has more captured nuts than any other component. It sucks, but we're gonna have to do it. So there's 4 up top here, and then there's 2 on either side down at the bottom. Now, this is kind of hard to show on camera. I'm gonna do my best that I can, but when you look at these nuts, they're hexagonal. And the way that these are designed to go into everything about all of these, pretty much every product that I make, if it has a captured nut, the sides of the hexagon are, they ride on the sides of the captured nut slot. So what that means is when you install it correctly, the point of the nut lives, I wonder if I can zoom, no I can't. The point of the nut should be facing upwards, okay? This, if that's confusing, check out the documentation. I will have detailed photos of the correct installation. So we're gonna go ahead and install all 8 of these now. So we have all 8 nuts installed now. And it is important, as you do this, to look down the bore of the holes and make sure that the threaded holes of the nut is concentric with your little 3D printed plastic holes. Okay, so that's cool. Next step on this thing is to install our bearing. Now the bearing, there's a bearing pocket right here in the back, and this simply with the shelf, these bearings have a little shelf. That shelf is to be on the outside. Where is that? Okay, so the little shelf. You can see the geometry of the bearing pocket. It's kind of dummy proof there. You can't put it in backwards. But so there's the bearing. And then we just press it down. And you can do this usually with your finger, but I like to press it and then find an object. Like, I'll try to do it so you can see it. An object. So you see this guy has this little ridgy thing. Set that off of the table. And then just press down on a table or some flat surface. That way you have a nice flush mount on the bearing that should fit flush. So now the intake for now is done. Let's move on to the next component that we need to do, and that is going to be the coupler housing. So the coupler housing has 4 captured nuts. There is, there's one there, one there, one there, and one there. They're on top of these little wing things. So there's 4 of those. We're going to go ahead and install them now in the same orientation that we installed all the other nuts, with the point facing out. All right, cool. So now we've got our 4 captured nuts installed. The next thing that we're going to do is go over here and grab one of our little rubber washers. This rubber washer acts as kind of our rear main seal here, and we are going to pop this into the little cavity on the back, which is the surface that was toward the bed. And that just kind of sets in there. And that is that component that for now is complete. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is set our motor into our motor housing. This will require 2 M3 by, I think M3 by 4 screws, M3 by 5 screws. They're in the build list. They're the only 2 M3 screws in the build. We're going to need those 2. We're going to need the motor coupler housing. We are going to need, the motor cooling jacket. We're going to need our motor, which is a 2845 2600 kV motor. And then we are going to need 2 of our little brass nipples here. All right, so let's start with installing the brass nipples. These guys were provided in your parts kit. If not, you're going to have to make them yourself. And what we're going to do is we are going to first test fit, because different printers do different stuff. And we want to make sure that we can at least slide these things in here, which on this printer works great. And then we're going to go ahead. Oh, sorry, I forgot about one consumable that you're going to need. And that is going to be super glue. I like to use this stuff, this Gorilla Glue, because you can brush it on. Works really great. If you have CA glue accelerant, that's fantastic, but I do not right now, so I'm just going to be brushing it on and letting it ride. So, this, I just grab a little bit of glue on our brush, and then I apply glue directly to the nipple itself. And you want to have a good little bit. We're essentially making a water seal with this as well as keeping it in place. So don't be too shy with it. And then from there, we're simply just going to press this into the hole with the glued side going in. And then kind of press it on a table or something. So that way, this seats into place. It goes down 5 millimeters. And what you're looking for is you want to see some glue squeeze out all the way around. Not a whole bunch, but as long as you see some glue squeeze out all the way around, you're good. You can go ahead and wipe some of it off. It just means that we have a good seal, which we want. I'm going to go ahead and rinse, wash, repeat with the other side because this has 2 ports. So I'm going to do the second port now the same way I did the first. All right, cool. So there is both of the little nipples for the tube installed. Next thing that we're going to do is where I usually have CA accelerant, so I can be sure that that's dried. We're going to go ahead and install our motor. Now, there is 2 sets of holes on your 2845 motor. As you can see, 2 of mine are already covered up with a little bit of silicone. We're going to want the 2 holes that are spaced furthest apart. Those are the ones that are going to interface with our mounting holes down here. Depending on your printer's accuracy, you may want to go and take your motor and just make sure that the motor shaft doesn't bind on the hole for the bore. It shouldn't, but just in case, put a good bit of tolerance in there. And now what we're going to do is we are going to put a bead of silicone. I got a silicone boogie in here. Oh my gosh. Look at that bad boy. That was satisfying. All right. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to apply a thin bead of silicone all the way around this face. Doesn't have to be a monumental amount of silicone. We're just creating a gasket so nothing leaks out the front. All right, cool. Now, what we're going to do first is pay attention to where our wires come out. This is oriented in a way that we want our wires to be facing toward the top of the water cooling jacket. We want the wires to be pointed up toward where these cooling ports are. So, and with this, it's not perfect, but if I look at my mounting holes that correspond with this, if I have them lined up in this way, I have my wires toward the top, which is good. That's what I want. If they are upside down, that is not what I want. So make sure everything's oriented in the right way. And then I'm taking a little look here at the direction of where these holes are. And what I want to do is I want to get them pretty well lined up before I even insert this thing, because although it is possible to spin it while it's in here, it's a little difficult. So a little bit of pre-alignment works pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. And then I simply place the motor in the cooling jacket, wiggle it around until it fits down into place. And this guy, there should be a little bit of the motor protruding, let's say 2 or 3 millimeters, but not a whole lot. And now I'm going to grab my 2 screws with my 2 M3 screws with my M3 Allen key, and I'm going to see if I got my alignment right. It'd be cool if I did. And by God, it looks like I did. All right, sweet. So I'm going to go ahead and screw these 2 screws in here on the bottom side of the motor mount. Or I'm sorry, on on the face where the shaft comes through here, there's these 2 screws. That is what I'm screwing in now. 1 and 2. Okay. One and 2. Oops. Got a little bit too much silicone in there and it's squeezing out past the shaft, which is not optimal. It'll introduce a little bit of friction in there until it kind of rubs away. Darn it. Oh well, that's okay. But this, when it's finished up, should look like this. Now we will later be putting a bead of silicone around the back to completely seal everything in. But we're going to be working with this for a minute, so we're going to leave it alone. Next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and we are going to put together our motor coupler housing and our intake. So for this, we're going to need 4 M2 by 10 screws that were included in your parts kit. We have our bearing installed. We have our rubber washer installed here. What I do like to do is put a small little bead of silicone right around this back, very thin, just a little schmutz. You're going to want to keep it away from your bearing. You don't want to introduce any drag into your bearing. So a little something like that. Not a lot, just a little. And then we're going to take our 2 components, make sure that your washer didn't fall out, and then we are going to put them together. They only go one way. There is a little interfacing geometry there. So, and then we're going to go ahead and start running our screws down. I've got my fancy little thing from Micro Center here. If you happen to have one too, you'll notice that these holes correspond perfectly with that, and that's because that's the tool that I use. When installing any of the screws in this build, if you encounter significant resistance when it goes into the nut, don't try to force it. It could and likely would spin the nut inside of the captured slot. Instead, what you will want to do is, I'll show you here when I put this one in. So if you encounter excessive resistance with the screw going in, it means that that screw or bolt is not interfacing into these threads correctly. And that means that you have to kind of wiggle the entire screwdriver one way or the other. And that will point those threads in a way that will get it to interface correctly with the nut. And sometimes, you know, these screws are good. They're stainless steel, but they're not $100 screws. So you know what? One screw just might not work with one nut. So if the screw feels like it doesn't want to go in, doesn't want to thread into that nut, just take it out and use another screw, because that's much better than spinning one of the nuts in here, because that can happen. And it's not a total deal breaker, but it doesn't give you the proper kind of torque spec or the tightness that you want. Additionally, don't over tighten these things. It's not a steel component. This is all plastic stuff. So give it, you know, I don't know, 5 or 6 foot-pounds of torque, not a whole lot. If it feels like too much torque, it probably is. So that is this component. Now what we're going to do is jump over to our servo and prep that. These servos that are included with your parts kit are the MG90S. Those are the nice metal geared servos. And they have this screw in the front. It is Phillips. So first we're going to have to switch over to the Phillips bit right here. And then we are going to be using our servo coupler. We're going to spend a couple of minutes here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install our servo coupler here. It has 2 holes in the coupler. It's a bore down straight through. You want those at 12 and 6 o'clock, so top and bottom. Just like that, looking at the top of the servo, looking at the bottom of the servo. Okay, and then what we're going to do is go ahead and install our Phillips screw right down through this. It'll screw right into the servo motor itself. Oops. All right, Cool. Now what we need to go ahead and do is grab our little half coupler. This will be included in your parts kit. And we're going to take out the 2 grub screws here. All right. Now, this gets placed into the coupler here, fat side first. All right, so as you can see, there's like a fat end and then a skinny little shaft. Skinny little shaft goes toward the opening. Fat side goes down through. And then you're going to want to kind of align it with the holes here as it goes down, and then just bam, push that bad boy down into place and you're good to go. Now here is a very important note. I've done this wrong. You have to take the whole boat apart. It's kind of a pain in the butt. So the grub screw we're going to insert down into the bottom. We're going to reinsert our grub screws. Get them started. Actually, you know what? I want to do this. Oh yeah. So what we need to do is, because of the design of this is just a very compact system. The way that this is designed, you cannot retighten the bottom grub screw once this is in the boat. It becomes inaccessible. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab our steering coupler. So it looks like that. Looks like we will need the steering coupler in this video. And then have your grub screws loose enough to where this axle can shoot all the way back through here. And then what we are going to do is we are going to take our bottom grub screw that we're not going to be able to mess with later, and we're going to snug it up until it just barely touches that shaft. And then we're going to pull it out, and then we're going to make sure that we can pull out our steering shaft and be able to insert it all the way back. But this bottom grub screw just kind of supports the shaft. Okay, so you're going to want to bring it up to where the shaft is, but don't tighten it, because if you tighten it, then you won't be able to get the shaft out, which it does come out for now. So what we do, and I'm sorry, you're going to want to put a little bit of Loctite on this thing before you do that, just so this bottom grub screw will stay in place. This is probably the most inopportune part of the design, but there's nothing I can do about it, man. I tried a bunch of different ways to get it to work, and this is the only way. Put a little dab of Loctite on the bottom of on this bottom grub screw, and then we are going to insert it back into our coupler, and then take our drive shaft, put it all the way back, and then we are just barely going to snug up this bottom grub screw until it just barely touches it. You can feel it with your Allen key where you'll start to get just a teeny bit of resistance, and then stop. And then pull this out. Make sure that this will go all the way back in. The way that I do that, to be sure, is I'll push it back, I'll set my finger here like a little depth gauge, pull it out, and make sure that I'm past the hole, which I am. Cool, so that's great. Now that bottom one just stays as is. You can leave it be, that Loctite will set, and all that thing does is provides a little a little shelf for this shaft to sit on, so that way when we eventually tighten the top one, which is accessible, all will be well. Now we're going to go ahead and install this servo into our intake coupler assembly here. So looking at the main bore of the intake, we are going to drop this bad mamma jamma down. You will see there is a little groove up there. That is for your wires. So we're going to go ahead and fit the wires in that corresponding groove. I like to just kind of hold them semi-taut out the back so that way they stay in place. And then this thing is just a press fit, satisfying. It is constrained otherwise with other geometry. All right, so that's that. Now we can go ahead and start messing with our shafts and stuff. This is where it really comes in handy getting that parts kit. It makes life a lot easier. So we are going to go ahead and install, well, first we'll grab our coupler here. We're going to take all 4 grub screws out because we are going to put Loctite on all of them. You don't need to Loctite everything. You can Loctite every screw in this thing, but you need to Loctite your coupler screws. It's especially the drive shaft ones. It's very important. So you have your other full coupler here. This one is 3.175 millimeters on one side and 3 millimeters on the other side. And just check and see which one corresponds with your motor. Cool, because that's what we're doing first. So now we're going to go ahead and put some Loctite on a grub screw. Whoa, just a little that will do. And then we're going to identify the flat spot of our motor. I'm sorry, the flat spot of our motor shaft. And then we're going to place the 3.175 end down. So we have the one of our little threaded holes. We'll shoot a screw, or we'll shoot a grub screw right through into that flat spot. That's what we want. All right, and we'll just kind of bring it down, not tight yet, just enough to hold it in place so we can get our other grub screw down there on the motor shaft side after we put Loctite on it. And that will go down here as well. So we got 1 and 2. And now we're going to just adjust this collar height so we have a little air gap in between this housing, and I think you can see that. But there's definitely a small gap in between these two. It's about 1 millimeter. It's not much, but it's there. You need that so you don't introduce friction and drag into the system. And then I'm just going back through here and I'm tightening these things down. And with these guys, you do not want to be cruising your boat across the lake and then have your drive shaft crap out. Trust me, I've had it happen. It sucks. So go ahead and run these things down. Don't strip them out, but do tighten them well. Okay, sweet. So that's that. I'll double check. Good. And good. All right, so that is done. Now we're going to go ahead and install our drive shaft. Our drive shaft has one long flat spot, that's for the impeller keyway, and then the other side has like a less severe key, or a less severe flat spot. And then we are going to do the exact same process we just did. We're going to apply a little bit of Loctite. Whoopsie daisy, just dropped Loctite on my desk. A little bit of Loctite there. Screw it into the coupler after our shaft is installed. Do not tighten down, just kind of bring it in until it keeps the shaft in place, and then I can use the Loctite that I just dropped on my desk for this screw. Probably dropped enough on the desk to finish the whole project with. And now we're just going to take the other bore hole right here and then put that screw right there. Wipe everything off, get nice and clean. Ouch! He just stabbed me right in the finger. It hurt too. Little bastard. All right, cool. So now we have one drive shaft in place. And from here, things get pretty simple on this front end side. So we're going to go ahead and take our assembly here. On the back of our coupler housing, we are going to just run this shaft right through. Press it through into place, just like so. And now, really all we have to do is put 4 M2 by 10 screws in here. And these screws will be for the motor mount to coupler housing connection right back here. Okay, sweet. So that is the last of the nuts and the bolts in this part. Now, for our final little assembly touches, we need to go ahead and we're going to put our forward seal in here, which is a rubber washer, and then a little M3 metal washer. The way that this goes, so you just grab your jet drive assembly, rubber washer goes on first. It makes first contact with the drive. So we'll push that down. And then metal washer over top of it. And then we'll go ahead and grab our little impeller shaft bushing, I think is what I'll call that. And then we will slide that down. You might want to test fit that too. I made this one a little oversized for printer tolerances and stuff, and make sure it doesn't get stuck on there. And then what I like to do is to kind of push it down through the bottom. And then I grab a little dab of white lithium grease. Pop it right down in there, right where it's going to live. So that way we have a little bit of lubrication. And then, bam, pop that bad boy back. Look, something like that. Don't worry, that lithium grease will go right away. Now we will go ahead and insert our intake grate. This guy is sized to pretty much just snap in here. Yeah, this one does. But depending on how good your printer is, it may or may not. So this thing is very important. The orientation needs to be correct. Like when you're looking at it, it has like a scoop built into it, and that scoop, just look at it, and it needs to be scooping water up into the drive. I will show very detailed pictures of that in the documentation, but it's almost impossible to show you that from here. So essentially, if you printed this thing correctly, the end, like the side that was on the print bed, that goes up into the drive. So I'm going to go ahead and just put 3 teeny little drops of super glue onto the drive here in this little lip. That is to keep everything in place. We're pretty much just like tack welding this thing. You don't want to have so much glue that it alters the geometry of your intake. You don't want to have like you don't want to get glue inside the intake. So I'm talking like 3 little specks of super glue. It doesn't take much. And later on in the process, we're going to be siliconing this bad boy in. And that will also help hold it. You don't need a lot here because this part is under vacuum. So it's not going to want to push away. If anything, it's going to want to suck in further. Cool. So as you can see, we have this in place. What I like to do is just take my shirt or something and get off any residue on the outside, because we also don't want to mess up this bottom face of the intake, because that is a mating face. So that is what we're looking for there. And then the last finale on this component is we are going to put a little bit of silicone around the back of the motor cooling drive like we were talking about earlier. So you just kind of slap your wires out of the way. And then this is just simply a bead of silicone around the back. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful thing in the world, but if you want it to be, kudos to you. I get kind of OCD about this, but it doesn't need to be beautiful. It just needs to be functional. You just need to make sure that you have a full bead of silicone around the back here, so water does not leak out. Cool. Just like that. And you can go ahead and take your finger and pretty it all up. Whatever you want to do there. And the reason we did this last is just because it's a pain in the butt to do otherwise. To be honest, once you get your motor coupler housing together, when you're assembling your stuff, you can do it then, and then go drink a cup of coffee or something and let it set up. So by the time you're ready to put it in the boat, it's good to go. This is the end of the boat bits. This is complete. This is ready to go into the boat and then move forward from here. Thanks for checking it out. Once again, thank you very much for your business, and we're almost ready to hit the water now. Next step, we're going to be going ahead to put this bad boy together. All right, let's get rocking and rolling. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take one of the remaining little rubber washer here, and this is going to be the seal that we use for our steering shaft. But before you do that, take your steering shaft and just make sure it goes through the hole, the proper hole. It's the one right here next to the flood chamber. And in this case, that guy is not gonna fit in there. It happens sometimes depending on, the amount of LF. Oh, there we go. depending on the amount of elephant's foot that your printer has. In my case, it's due to the primer and spray paint that I put on this bad boy to get this nice smooth finish here. That's another thing worth noting. This guy, the bottom planing surface of your hull, make it smooth. It needs to be smooth. So we're going to first insert our little rubber washer right down into this small little pocket on the inside of the hull. Let me try to get that and you'll be able to see it. Right there on the inside of the hull where the steering shaft comes through, there's a little recessed pocket. That is exactly where we're going to insert this thing. I happen to have a little print boogie there, so I'm going to get it out now. All right, so that pocket right there, that pocket right there is where we are going to insert our bearing. I'm really hoping that you can see that, but it is shown in detail in the documentation. So now we're going to go back to our trusty silicone here, and we are going to put a nice dab of silicone on, a nice dab of silicone on our rubber washer. Just a nice little dab will do, and then the little dab of silicone will go into the hull. It will face the hull. So we're going to place this rubber washer into that pocket, and then just, if you look on the back of the boat, we get a little bit of silicone squeeze out. I like to take that and then smear it around this pocket, so it creates an extra watertight seal, and then it also acts as kind of like a little bit of a glue to hold that in. Do remember to do this, because once everything's in there, it's extraordinarily hard, if not impossible, to get it in there. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to finally install this thing into the boat. Oh my goodness, it's been a long time coming, and here we are. So this intake grate, you'll notice around the outside of the intake grate, where the actual intake is, there is flat spots. Like there's pretty much, we're going to lay a bead of silicone as a perimeter all the way around the outside of the intake grate onto the actual intake itself, and that gives us a nice watertight seal down at the bottom. So I'm going to do that now. All right, so that's what we're looking for there. And now we are going to do a thin layer of silicone around this. So this is important because this is the borehole for our drive. So we don't want to get a bunch of silicone down in the bore of our drive. So don't go too heavy on this. Just a little bit like that, a thin little coat. And then what I like to do is take my finger, and I mean, we're talking like a sub-millimeter coat, just enough. Like, I mean, just a thin little glazing here. You do want to make sure there's silicone all the way around, but it's a very thin glaze, okay? And then I'll take my pinky and I'll put it in the borehole, and then I'll run this around the perimeter of that borehole to dry up those edges. Let me see if you can see that. See, it's kind of evident right there. It's dry around like the, I don't know, 1 or 2 millimeters all the way around that borehole. Because what happens is when we bolt this thing in, I don't want any squeeze out to come in here, because that's just, there's going to be butt tons of water flowing through there, and we want it to have a nice clear path. So from here, we're going to install this thing into the boat. This shaft, the drive shaft, will go down through this large hole. We're coming in from the inside, but we're going to set this down into place like yay, and then this will fall right down into place where it lives. And then we're going to come up under here and make sure that our intake grate fits through the hole. And then, as you can see, there will be some silicone squeeze out from the bottom, and we're going to want to wipe that out away from the intake. So anywhere that there's squeeze out, if there's squeeze out here in this corner, wipe down. If there's squeeze out up here, wipe away. So that way we're not getting any junk in our intake grate. Cool. So this is what we're left with. We now have, this thing is unsecured right now, but it's sitting in place. Our intake grate went through the hole in the bottom of the hull, and you may need to do a little bit of sanding on your hull to get it to fit. I find, generally speaking, it's these top two corners of the hull that need to be sanded a little bit just because of that bridging gap right there. Sometimes there's a teeny little bit of droopage. So that's now in place. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go over here to our impeller housing. If you can see, my impeller stator elements are nice and shiny, and that is because I did the post-processing on this. It's an important part to post-process if you so choose to do that, and that is with this stuff right here, this little UV resin. There'll be a whole separate video on that. But now we're going to grab our two number 5 O-rings that were included in your parts kit. And these guys are going to sit right in these two corresponding pockets. 1 and 2. These are here to give us a very nice watertight seal on our water cooling lines. And then we're going to need 4 M2 by 10 screws, which were also included in your parts kit, and then a little screwdriver for them. And if you want, before you put this impeller housing in, you can put in the 2 captured nuts that live on either side, but I'm already here, so we're just going to roll with it. What I do like to do with this is I like to get one of these bottom screws started, and I like to get it started like yay, where the screw is poking through the bottom like 1 millimeter or so, not too significantly. But what that is it's like a little index point for me, so then I can, and when you do this, you're going to want to kind of hold the boat here and bring the impeller housing up to it so these 2 O-rings don't fall out. And then, I'm going to try to do this so you can see it. I'm simply just placing this impeller housing over the shaft, and then I'm wiggling it around until, boom, I just felt my screw fall into the appropriate hole. So I'm going to go ahead and start screwing that bad boy in. And now here, pay attention, have your hand on the inside here to hold the drive in place. And if you encounter any excessive resistance from the screw, then we're going to try our little wiggle trick we were talking about earlier. But we don't want to strip out these screws or spin the bolts on these or anything, so it'd be easy. So I did the bottom right corner, looking down on the boat. And now I'm going to do the top left corner. And I didn't run that screw down. I just kind of got it in place. Got it in place and then tightened it down to where it came snug to the hull, but not super tight. So now I'm going to continue to screw this in, like yay. And I'm going to do the other 2 screws. So I've got all 4 of these guys snug down. Now I can insert my 2 M2 screws, nuts into the little captured nut slots here, and one here. Ah, crap. You know what else I forgot to put in? The threaded brass insert too. We're going to have to do that while it's in the boat. So for the record, if you're not following me along step by step, you're going to want to assemble this impeller housing before you put it in the boat. It just makes it easier. You can do it either way. But we are going to have to put our threaded brass insert down in the bottom here. We'll go over that in just a moment. And once again, as mentioned previously, all of these captured nuts are installed with the pointy end of the nut facing out. And that allows the flat spots to ride on the sidewalls of the captured slots. 1 and 2. And we are in there like swimwear. All right, sweet. We've got concentricity with these bores here. So now I got to put this heated, or the brass insert in here. It's the only brass insert in the build. Oh, where do they live? I got parts all over the place. This whole development thing can be some messy business. Should have had that in place before I started the video, guys. Sorry. There it is. Alright, I'm back. I had to run around and find my little brass inserts. These are just M2 by, like M2 by 3 or 4. They're very small. So, to you folks that have a nice brass inserter, heated inserter, I'm envious of you. I need to get one. I don't have one. So, I go about this in a very high-tech manner. I just screw this on an M2 by 10 screw. And then I bring it all the way down so that the thread of the screw goes all the way down to the bottom but doesn't protrude through the brass insert. And then I just grab my fancy lighter. It's not even a fancy lighter. It's like one of the crappy 7-Eleven ones. And I heat that bad boy up. And then I'm going to place it down into the bottom of the impeller housing to where the brass insert sits flush with the, I didn't heat that enough, where the brass insert sits flush with the plastic in the drive. So you want to have that bad boy all the way inserted. And then, of course, just try to do it as straight as possible. And if anything, if it's going to be leaning anyway, have the screw slightly leaning back toward the transom of the hull. So that way, if there is any misalignment, it's pulling your ride plate in toward the hull and not leaving a big air gap. See? I have a teeny little bit of gangster lean back toward the hull. And then up and down is good enough for government work. So, and that optimally would be done before you even install this thing, but I forgot. So we're going to give this a second to cool. And also, let me take it out here. And I'll show you. It is important to make sure that that brass insert is set all the way inside the pump. And then if there's like a little wave of plastic that comes up around the side, which there usually is, I take some sandpaper and just lightly kind of brush that little lip down that it creates when it displaces that molten plastic. And what I want is a nice flush bottom there. So that way the ride plate, when it goes on, does not get all jumbled up right there. All right, cool. Moving on. This component's done. Now we're going to insert our impeller, which is always a cool spot. If you see the impeller here and you're like, wow, that's shiny, that's because I also did the post-processing technique on both the suction and pressure face of the impeller. If this impeller looks different than the one that you have, that is possible. I'm currently optimizing the impeller pitch profile and some other things, so it may look different by the time you get it. So we have a flat spot on the axle, and that corresponds with the flat spot here in our keyway for our impeller. So we're going to align them pretty much to where they're going to go. And then we start to push down. And then looking at the back of the boat, we're going to twist this thing counterclockwise. And the impeller will twist down over the impeller housing stator elements and slide right down into place. So that is the impeller installed correctly. Next, we're going to jump over to our nozzle and diffuser. We have to do two things here. We will be installing our bearing, and we will be installing our cooling hose nipple. So first we'll do the bearing. There's a bearing pocket right there. If the bearing doesn't fit in there, you can just get in there with a utility knife and clean it ever so gently to allow it to slip into place, like I'm probably gonna have to do here, maybe not. Nope. Cool, sweet. So that popped right down into place there. That is properly installed. And then we're gonna go ahead and squeeze some white lithium grease in here, like we forgot to do with our intake. All right. Now the white lithium grease is done. We're going to go ahead and install our cooling nipple into the water cooling port here. First, we're going to just do a quick little test fit, make sure everything fits nicely, which it does. Fantastic. And then, just like the other ones, we're going to take some super glue. And we are going to brush some super glue around one end of this thing. We're not being stingy here. We're using enough super glue to be able to hold it in place and create a good watertight seal. So make sure that you get super glue all the way around the circumference of one end of this brass nipple. And then we're going to place it. This is the glued end is going in. We're going to place it like a, get it started. Sweet. And then press it down on something. You'll hear it kind of click down into place. And as before, we're looking for a nice little bead of squeeze out all the way around this thing, 360 degrees, and then if you so choose, you can wipe it off and wipe it on your pants, because be a man. All right, sweet. So that is that. That component is ready to go into place here. And to do that, we're going to use, guess what? We're going to use 2 M2x10 screws. I tried to keep the hardware as consistent as possible for you guys, so even if you do decide to buy your own hardware, you can just get these and not have to worry about getting a bunch of different bulk packs of stuff. So this is now in place. You know what we're going to do to make life easier? We're going to install our short tube. Our short tube is going to be for the water cooling intake, where it comes out of the nozzle and then goes into the motor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that in the bottom of these 2 holes, just like that. I'm going to place it through the boat. Then we're going to slip it up over this water cooling jacket nipple, just like that. Cool. I hope you can see that. All right. Fantastic. Now we're going to install our diffuser. And to do that, we're just going to make sure that our little drive shaft right here, hold on, I should probably make sure that's screwed on. So we're going to make sure that our little axle goes into the bearing here, as well as this brass tube being fitted onto the water cooling hose. And it can be a little bit of a song and dance. You just gotta be patient, fiddle with it. A little bit of pillow talk sometimes helps. Fantastic. Now we're right there. And now, you guessed it, it's time for 2 M2x10 screws. So I'm going to install those now. All right, cool. Dudes, we are almost there. So now what we can do is go ahead and install our steering rod here. Let's talk about how this thing goes together. First things first, we have our little steering lug, and that gets a M2 lock nut, which was included in your parts kit. Sweet. So we have our little M2 lock nut right there, and we're going to install that into this little hexagonal key right there. It looks like I got a little print booger there. And this can sort of be a pain in the butt sometimes. So what I like to do is to get a screw started here from the outside, this being the outside, this the spot opposite of where the nut goes. And I kind of get this down into place, and I'll thread it all the way in. And then I'll spin the thread a little bit because we don't need this 3D printed part to catch the thread. We got a lock nut for that. So now I'll back this off a bit, enough to where that screw is still kind of visible there, poking up through. And then what I'll do is I'll install my lock nut and start threading it on. And then we just want to orient it correctly. Guess how we orient it, with the pointy part of the nut facing out, just like everything else. I'm going to get a small pair of pliers to orient that correctly. And then we just kind of use the leverage that the threads provide to screw that bad boy down into place. Come on, you can do it. If you can, anyway. Oh, well, you know what? I might just press this thing. We'll see if it'll press. However you get it in there, it's just important that it's in there. Ugh. This thing's a pain in the butt. I forgot about this. Maybe I can get it started first. This thing is difficult. It's difficult. And I'm going to now pull this screw out and then see if I can't get this little lock nut inserted with my screwdriver. You know what? I could probably put this thing in backwards. Might make life easier. I think I can do that. Sweet. All right. So I installed this lock nut in here. I actually installed it backwards because it has a little bit of like a chamfer there. I hope that is okay. We're getting ready to find out. I'm going to run my screw in here. And it looks like it's going to be okay, actually. Now I'm just going to run the screw all the way down and then kind of tighten it, and that will pull this lock nut into its final destination, which it's there now. It doesn't go down in that pocket very far, just maybe like a millimeter. All right, now what we're left with is that locking M2 nut right down in that pocket. Okay, now for the drive shaft, the steering shaft component, we have a slotted end and then one end with no slot on it. The slotted end goes here in the shaft lug, which corresponds with the keyway in the shaft. And now you guys, you all are going to have a perfectly cut steering shaft where there shouldn't be anything, if anything, very, very little shaft protruding, maybe like that. This one's cut way too long, and I just didn't feel like going back out there with a grinder to recut it. So now we're going to insert this thing. This will get inserted here in this little hole in the nozzle, and then that will go straight back through the hull past our cool little rubber bushing that we put in there. Oop, that didn't set up yet, so it just pushed out, but that's okay. We can work with that. I'm just getting my sharp needle nose pliers, put it back into place. Yeah, when installing this, make sure that your little rubber bushing here in the hull doesn't push out. It might be a better idea to maybe use a teeny little dab of super glue there, or allow a good time to set up. I didn't allow much time to set up because I'm doing this here in video. All right, so that is now in place. And what we can do now is grab a nozzle plate, one of many, many nozzle plates. There are multiple, and they are all for your trim adjustment pleasures. And then we'll go ahead and slide our nozzle plate on. And this just slides, it's like a little dovetail almost, that this thing just correspondingly slides in there. And then we have alignment there where, as you can see, the hole in the lug corresponds with this little cutout in the nozzle plate. And then all we do now is screw in our, guess what size, an M2 by 10 screw. We're going to screw that bad boy right into the front of our lug, our steering lug. Sweet. And then we don't want to tighten this thing very much. We just want to have it to where we want it to hold this thing so it doesn't have a lot of play room, but we don't want to over tighten it because it needs to be able to rotate freely around here. Okay, so that is now in place. And now what we're going to do is make sure that our nozzle plate is nice and flushed up there. And then we're going to go back inside the boat to our grub screw that is in our steering coupler. Remember, the one that is accessible later in life. And now with this bad boy, we're going to apply some blue Loctite to it. Now there's another thing. Be careful. Try to find yourself like a magnetic tip, or even better, bring the boat up to you like this, and then insert this thing in gently to screw it in place. Because, talking from experience, if you drop this thing into the boat, it sucks getting it out. It sucks badly. As a matter of fact, I would not recommend doing that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure everything is nice and straightened up here. Okay, your nozzle plate isn't cocked off to the side or anything. It's nice and straight. And then you have the smallest little gap, small little air gap there, and then like a small little air gap in between your nozzle plate and your coupler. You don't want to bind anything up. And then we're going to hold on to whatever we can hold on to and wrench this thing down within reason. I mean, you know, don't go crazy and strip your nut, don't break your servo or anything, but we do want to screw this top grub screw of our top grub screw of our shaft coupler down really nice, because this shaft, the end of this shaft, does not have any slots in it, so we are relying on friction there. So I have that. Needs tightened more. Let me tighten this thing some more. It's still freely spinning in there. Much better. Okay. Oh, you know what? Hold on. Maybe that thing didn't get back far enough. What do I got going on here? It's still freely spinning. I thought it was good, but it's not. I'm bringing this bad boy back out. I think that's what that is. I'm pretty sure. There we go. It wasn't back far enough. So make sure that your steering rod is fully inserted into your collar here. And now we'll go ahead and tighten this down. At first it wasn't holding it. I was like, what is going on here? Yeah, now it's holding well. Okay. Got that nice and tight, and now that is not going anywhere. Sweet. All right. Now that's good. Let's go on to installing the ride plate here. And this is a very simple affair also. There's another set of dovetails here that correspond to these dovetail rails on the bottom of your impeller housing and stuff. And these should just slide right on, just like that. And then we want to make sure that there's no gap there. And then we're going to go ahead and take our M2 by 4 screw. See, I didn't trick. You probably thought I was getting ready to say M2 by 10, didn't you? Oh, please hold it, gotta grab it. There we go. One M2x4 screw is what is the set plate for this. And for the record, this is another component that should be post-processed, okay? Spend the time to sand the bottom of your ride plate. It will make things better. Essentially, anytime that you have something that's in contact with the water, you're going to want to sand the hell out of it and make it nice and smooth so you reduce any drag. That is properly installed, however, not post-processed. And then there are multiple trim adjustments on this too. So that is almost done. So now we need to grab, well, now this is all the mechanical stuff. Now we're getting to our hardware. So we have our ESC and we have our battery. So this guy, you can do it kind of any way you want to. I personally prefer to put the battery in first. And so I will pull, let's see here, how do I get this? I'll take my little wires that we had facing up. This is why we did that, so it doesn't get in the way of the battery. And I pull them kind of back and out of the way. And then I put my battery in wires first, so that way I can keep things nice and tidy. And it just slips in this little kind of fins. Those two little fins are like the little battery tray. And then that leaves us with our connector down here inaccessible. So that's done. Now we're going to go ahead and grab our ESC. And what I do like to do, this is kind of just tidying things up. So I like to take these wires. Let me pull that battery out real quick. I like to take the wires on my servo and then I put them under my motor wires and then wrap them back toward the right side of the boat. And then I like to do the same thing with my ESC wires, put them under the wires, wrap them around the right side of the boat, just like that. You'll see why here in a second. So I'm going to reinstall my battery just as I had done before with the wires first, so that way my connector is here and accessible, but not in the way of everything. And now I have my ESC. This ESC is going to sit on the flood chamber side in the space right in between the drive and the flood chamber. It lives right there. Okay, so just from experience here, I like to cut a little 45-ish degree angle here on my ESC. And with this said too, whatever ESC you have, you're going to have to put little brass nipples on the ends of that too, or something, so you can put tubing on it. Alright, so well, first things first, let me plug in my wires here. These are just going to match up just so I'm not fiddling around in there trying to do that later. I'm just going to plug my motor wires into my ESC, nice and easy. And now I can just kind of shuffle that out of the way, and I'm going to set this ESC in here. So I have my connector toward the stern of the boat, toward the back. And then my cooling tube here, I'm going to fish this, the end that is facing toward the back of the boat, that is going to go right out the back of the boat in this second hole up here. Let me see. You can just kind of push it through. Bam. That's our exhaust. And then the ESC itself is almost ready to set down in here, but we do need to put our long cooling hose on here. So the long cooling hose sets on the front end of the ESC, and that will wrap up under here in the hull, up under the nose of the battery, or above, in between the top of the battery and then the inside of the hull. And then that, as you can see, it wraps up, kind of goes around this stuff, comes back to here, and then that will plug right into this cooling hose nipple right there on the side of our motor cooling. So the way that this cooling path goes, water comes out of the nozzle. Some of it is tapped off rearward into the hull. It first cools the motor jacket, and then it makes a loop out and then cools the ESC and then is exhausted out of the boat. So that is how that goes. And then we just kind of fiddle around with stuff to get it all tucked into place. Do keep your battery connector here kind of close at hand. So you might have to fiddle things one way or another to make sure everything fits. Do not kink your cooling hose. That is an important thing. And then, you know, don't break anything. Try not to break anything. So what we're left with is this. We have our little radio controller that for now just sits in here. There will be a chassis for it. Probably by the time you are seeing this, you'll just drop a little chassis in here. I'm not doing any mounting rails like some of the other options. They are great, but I'm trying to cut down on weight. So nothing just pops in there for now. And that's that, buddy. You're ready to connect this thing, put the lid on, and ride. So we'll go over the lid real quick. Where is that lid? I just see it. All right, so the lid is installed this way. I like to take it. The grooves are up top. These 3 grooves, they stay up top. I kind of bend it like a taco, like the way you're supposed to bend pizza while you're eating it. And then I slide this kind of down these grooves and get it set in the back first. You'll notice that it should sit pretty well flush. There's interfacing geometry there. Well, I shouldn't say flush. You should notice there shouldn't be a big air gap in between the lid and the hull. It seals up pretty good there. And then I will leave the top sides unaffixed yet. And what I'll do is I'll take a corner in the front and I'll bend it in to where it kind of locks into its geometry. And then I'll do the same thing with the left side. And then I'll run my finger across that, snap it down into place, and then just run everything down. It should snap right into place. See, there's no major air gaps there. You can just look at it and tell it's watertight. And boom, dude, do that. That is your scooter hull. We're ready to go. Now, of course, you have to plug in the battery, but yeah, I think that's everything. Yep, that's ready for the water. All right, cool. So that is the assembly of the scooter hull with the PICO-1. Thank you all for your business. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for taking interest in this hobby. This is pretty cool. To be honest, I've never done any RC stuff in my life until I embarked upon this, and yeah, it's fun. It's super fun. So hope you guys have a good time on the water. Any questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to voice them. I'm starting a Facebook page. Yeah, I'm gonna edit this out now. Thanks. Bye.